I heard the doorbell ring at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning, and something in my stomach dropped before I even got out of bed. I don't know how to explain that feeling. It wasn't quite dread. It wasn't quite fear. It was more like the way the air feels before a thunderstorm rolls in heavy, electric, and wrong. I'd lived in my mother's house for 2 years by then, the house she left me when she passed. And in all that time, I'd never once had an unexpected visitor at that hour. My neighbors were quiet people. My friends knew to call first. And my sister hadn't spoken to me in 3 years. I pulled on my robe and walked down the hallway slowly. The morning light was coming through the kitchen window in long, pale strips, and the coffee I'd set on a timer was just beginning to brew. I told myself it was probably a delivery. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I looked through the peephole anyway. It was my sister. And she wasn't alone. Her husband was standing behind her on the porch, and there was a minivan parked in my driveway with what looked like boxes stacked in the back. My sister was wearing the expression she always wore when she'd already made a decision she knew I wasn't going to chin up, shoulders back. Eyes just slightly too steady, the way a person looks when they've rehearsed what they're about to say. 3 years. 3 years of silence, of unanswered calls during our mother's illness, of empty chairs at the funeral, of a handwritten letter I sent that came back unopened. 3 years. And now she was standing on my porch at 7:30 in the morning with a minivan full of boxes. I opened the door. She smiled first. That was the thing that hit me hardest. She smiled. Like no time had passed at all. Like we'd seen each other last Sunday at brunch. "We need to talk," she said. "Can we come in?" I didn't move from the doorway. "I want you to understand that. I know how these stories go. I know the version where the woman steps aside and says, 'Of course, come in, sit down, let me get you some coffee,' and then spends the next 6 months trying to undo that one moment of hesitation. I had read enough, lived enough, and honestly grieved enough to know that stepping aside was not what I was going to do. 'What are you doing here?' I said." Her smile flickered just slightly. "Margaret, come on. It's early and we drove 4 hours. Can we please just come inside and talk like adults?" "I'm talking to you right now," I said. "What's in the van?" Her husband shifted his weight behind her. He was a man who had always reminded me of a person waiting for a bus present, but not quite committed to anything. "We've been having some financial difficulties," my sister said. Her voice had shifted into the tone I remembered from childhood. The one she used when she wanted something and had already decided the wanting was reasonable. "The house situation isn't working out. We thought, since this house is just sitting here with only you in it, and since technically Mom always said she wanted us both to feel welcome here." "Stop," I said. She blinked. "This house is not just sitting here," I said. "I live here. I have lived here for 2 years. I moved back to take care of Mom when she got sick, which I did alone. By the way, for 14 months, and she left this house to me in her will, which you know because you were sent a copy of the will." "Margaret, I'm not finished." And I meant it. I felt something settle in my chest, steady and clear, the way I imagine a foundation feels under a house quiet but immovable. "You didn't come to the hospital once. You didn't come to the funeral. You sent a card, one card, and that was the last I heard from you until this morning. And now you're here with a van full of boxes at 7:30 a.m., and I need you to tell me what exactly you thought was going to happen here." My sister looked at her husband. He looked at his shoes. "We're family," she said finally. And her voice had a different quality now, thinner, more careful. "Whatever happened between us, we're still family." And I thought, "What did you think?" I said, and I genuinely wanted to know. I had spent 3 years asking myself that question in various forms. What did she think when she stopped answering my calls? What did she think when she let me sit alone in a hospital waiting room at 2 in the morning? What did she think she was entitled to after all of that? I wanted to hear her say it. She didn't say it. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she said, "Can we at least sit on the porch?" I thought about it. I want to be honest with you, there was a part of me that wanted to say no, go back to the van, get off my property, but there was another part, a part I think every person carries who has ever loved a difficult family member, that still remembered who she used to be. My sister at 8 years old, sharing her Halloween candy with me. My sister at 16, staying up all night when I had my tonsils out because I said I was scared. That person was in there somewhere. She was also standing on my porch with a van full of boxes, but she was in there. 5 minutes, I said. On the porch. I did not invite her husband inside. We sat in the 2 wooden chairs my mother used to use on summer evenings. And for a moment, neither of us said anything. The neighborhood was waking up slowly around us, a sprinkler system clicking on 2 houses down, a car starting somewhere on the street. I know I wasn't there, my sister said finally. She was looking at the yard, not at me. I know that. I have to live with that. Yes, I said, you do. Things with Daniel were bad back then. Really bad. I was barely keeping my own head above water. She paused. That's not an excuse. I'm just trying to explain. I understand things were hard for you, I said. She flinched. I didn't say it to be cruel. I said it because it was true, and because I had learned in the last several years that the truth, stated plainly and without apology, is sometimes the only language that gets through. What is in the van? I asked again. She turned to look at me then. Some of our things. I thought, if you had any room, even just for a little while. No, I said. Margaret, I want you to hear me, I said. Not because I'm angry, although I am. Not because I want to punish you, although I won't pretend part of me doesn't feel that way. I want you to hear me because you are my sister, and I do not want you to walk away from this porch having misunderstood where I stand. This is my home. Mom left it to me because I was here. I earned it in the hardest way a person can earn anything, and I will not have it taken from me by someone who thinks 3 years of silence can just be forgiven over a morning conversation when it happens to be convenient. She was quiet for a long time. A long time. Long enough that the sprinkler 2 houses down completed its cycle and clicked off. I thought you'd say yes, she said softly. Because you always say yes. And that right there was the most honest thing she'd said all morning. Because she was right. I had always said yes. I had said yes to covering for her when we were teenagers. Yes to lending her money in our 20s. Yes to pretending her first husband wasn't stealing from her until she figured it out herself. Yes to holiday dinners where she brought drama like other people bring wine. Yes to phone calls at midnight. Yes to cleaning up messes I hadn't made. I had been saying yes to my sister for 60 years, and she had made a calculation, conscious or not, that this was just another one of those moments. She had driven 4 hours at the assumption that I would step aside. I know, I said, but I'm not saying yes this time. She left an hour later. Not without argument, there was argument. There were tears. At one point, her husband said something about what my mother would have wanted, that I chose to let pass without response, because some things aren't worth dignifying. But she left. The van backed out of my driveway and turned down the street, and I stood at the window and watched until I couldn't see it anymore. I want to tell you that I felt good in that moment. Triumphant, strong, the way the women in stories feel when they finally stand up for themselves. But mostly what I felt was tired and sad, and the particular ache of someone who has just done the right thing and still isn't sure it was worth it. That was in the spring. What happened next took me completely by surprise. 3 weeks after that morning, I got a certified letter from an attorney in my sister's city. The letter was very formal, very official looking, and it informed me that my sister was contesting our mother's will on the grounds that I had exercised undue influence over my mother during her illness, taking advantage of her declining mental state to secure a larger share of the estate. I sat at my kitchen table and read the letter 3 times. My mother had been of perfectly sound mind until the last few weeks of her life. Her attorney, a careful and experienced woman who had known our family for 20 years, had taken every appropriate step when drafting the final will. There was nothing that could reasonably support what my sister was claiming, but I also knew that reasonable and legal are not always the same thing, and that anyone can file a lawsuit. and that the process of defending against one, even a baseless one, costs money and time, and the kind of emotional energy that doesn't come back quickly once it's spent. I called my own attorney the next morning. She listened to everything I told her, asked clear, precise questions, and then was quiet for a moment before she said, "Do you have documentation of the care you provided during your mother's illness?" I did. I had kept records not because I expected to need them, but because I am a person who keeps records. I had a calendar with every appointment, every hospital visit, every prescription pickup. I had receipts. I had emails to my mother's doctors. I had photographs of her medications organized by day of the week. I had records of the nights I slept in the chair by her bed because she didn't want to be alone. "Send me everything," my attorney said. I sent her everything. What I didn't know yet, what I found out 3 weeks after that, was that my sister had made a significant error in her timeline. In her legal complaint, she claimed that my mother had been mentally incapacitated during the period when she'd made certain updates to her will. The specific period she cited was the summer of the year before she died. The problem with that claim was that the summer she cited was the same summer my mother had written a series of letters, long, articulate, detailed letters to various family members and old friends, letters that those people had saved, letters that demonstrated clearly and without question that my mother's mind was entirely her own. My attorney sent a formal response to my sister's attorney. The response included, among other things, copies of several of those letters. I did not hear from my sister's attorney again. What I heard instead, about 6 weeks later, was my phone ringing at 10 o'clock on a Sunday night. I looked at the screen. It was my sister. I sat with the phone in my hand for 4 rings. I thought about all the times I had picked up without hesitation, without wondering what it would cost me, without asking myself whether I actually had anything left to give. I thought about the van in my driveway. I thought about the certified letter. I thought about what she had said on the porch. "I thought you'd say yes because you always say yes." I answered. "I dropped the lawsuit," she said. No hello. No preamble. Her voice was flat and tired and older than I remembered it. "I know," I said. Silence. "I need you to know something," she said. "I need you to know that I understand what I did. Not just last spring. Everything. The last 3 years. The hospital. The funeral. All of it." She paused. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed to say it." I thought about what I wanted to say. I had imagined this conversation many times, in many versions. In some versions, I was cold. In some, I was generous. In one version, I had been very, very clear about every specific way she had failed me and left it at that. But sitting there on a Sunday night in my mother's house, my house with the lights low and the neighborhood quiet, and my 63 years sitting with me like a presence, what I felt was something simpler than any of those versions. "I hear you," I said. She exhaled, a long, slow sound. "I'm not ready to talk about the rest of it yet," I said. "I don't know if I ever will be, but I hear you." "That's fair," she said softly. We didn't talk for long after that. There wasn't much to say that night. Maybe there would be more. Someday. Maybe there wouldn't. I had learned in the preceding months that I couldn't control what my sister chose to do with whatever came next. I could only control what I chose to do with mine. After we hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a while. The house was quiet the way old houses get quiet at night, full of small sounds, the refrigerator humming, the wood settling, the occasional sigh of wind past the window frames. I had lived in this house as a child. I had come back to it as a daughter, to care for the woman who had first cared for me. I had sat in this kitchen through some of the hardest nights of my life, holding my mother's hand, reading to her, making sure her medication was right, making sure she wasn't alone. This house was mine. Not because my mother's will said so, though it did. Not because I had defended it against a baseless legal claim, though I had. It was mine because I had shown up for it, and for the person inside it, when showing up was hard. No one had given me that. I had earned it in the only way that actually counts. I got up, poured myself a glass of water, and looked out the window at the yard. The oak tree my father had planted when I was 4 was enormous now, spreading its branches wide across the evening sky. My mother had loved that tree. She used to say it was a good reminder that things worth having take a long time to grow. I thought she was right about that. I think she was right about a lot of things. The next morning, I called my attorney and told her the matter was settled. She sounded quietly pleased, the way careful people sound when they've helped someone protect something important. I thanked her. I wrote the check for her invoice without resentment. It was money I spent to protect what was mine, and that made it worth every dollar. Then I made coffee, and I sat in my mother's chair by the kitchen window, and I watched the morning come in. My sister and I spoke again a few months later. It was short. She asked how I was. I told her. I asked how she was. She told me. The conversation had the careful quality of two people learning to walk on newly repaired ground, testing each step before shifting their weight. It wasn't warmth, exactly, but it wasn't nothing, either. I don't know what we'll be to each other eventually. I'm 63 years old, and I've made peace with not knowing how certain things end. What I do know is this. I said no when I needed to say no, and the house didn't fall down. The oak tree is still standing. The coffee still tastes like mornings, and I'm still here. If you've been watching from the beginning, thank you for staying with me through this one. These aren't easy stories to tell, and they're not always easy to hear. But if there's one thing I want to leave you with today, it's this. The moment you decide your home, your peace, and your dignity are worth protecting is the moment everything starts to change. It doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to be dramatic. Sometimes it's just standing in a doorway at 7:30 in the morning and not stepping aside. That's enough. That's always been enough. Drop your city in the comments and let me know where you're watching from today. And if this story meant something to you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. I'll see you in the next one.